Welcome to Conversations with the USA Race Walking Foundation.
Okay, welcome everybody. We're having another one of our talks with USA Race Walking Foundation. Today we have Carmen Jackinsky joining us from Reshod Walking Shoes. And 2 days ago, we missed a very significant milestone. Reshod Walking Shoes is now an amazing 15 years old. And I've always said Reshod is the only exclusive race walking shoe company out there. Carmen is going to give us a little bit of a background as to where the company came from, what her background is, and why she decided to do this. So welcome, Carmen, and why don't you, give us a little bit of an intro to your company.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jeff. I appreciate you telling my story. And it's actually a bit surprising to me that I'm actually 15 years old here with Reshod Walking Shoes. The brand is not a race walk brand per se, but every shoe that I make is suitable for race walking. If I were Reshod Race Walking Shoes, I would only attract race walkers. But in fact, the design that I came up with for the midsole of my shoe works really well for power walkers, fitness walkers, dog walkers, leisure walkers, occupational walkers, and of course, race walkers. So that was my goal, was to bridge a technology that would bridge all the walkers into one technology so we can expand our offerings. So
That's great. And to be totally truthful, I think of you because race walking is my primary focus. But if I go out and just power walk or health walk, I wear the blue Coach Carmen's and go out, and I find they work really well, much better than throwing on a running shoe. And the days of the big companies servicing race walking seem to be, almost non-existent.
yeah, that's a good point. And I get people who call all the time saying, I'm not a race walker. Can I wear your shoes? And I say, of course. I think race walkers know more about walking than most people. And it's because we walk over and over. We're always taking that heel toe step. We're thinking about the technique all the time. So it kind of lends itself to being experts in walking. And who better to make a walking shoe for walkers than race walkers? So that's my thought. And that's why I started Reshod Walking Shoes, is I wanted to actually grow our sport. And what I learned was race walking is a niche market. So if you want to sell shoes to race walkers, you're going to really limit yourself. And a lot of the big brands didn't want to take on race walking for that reason. So my thought was, what if we had a technology that was unique to walking, but worked for all types of walkers? Now it's no longer a niche market. It's a market for, the biggest category out there. If you look at the demographics, you'll find that walking is and has been the biggest category for activity for years.
Absolutely.
So that's what I'm doing.
Okay, and can you give us a 1 minute, I know it's hard to do, but a 1 minute summary of your background, where you started athletically, what your credentials are in terms of, I know you have experience with the shoe industry and things like that. Just kind of fill us in a little bit so we know who's talking.
Well, actually, I was just a race walker like everybody else. I just kind of found myself in the sport like so many do. I was injured as a gymnast and became actually, you got the hill stride was my first walk. So here I was an injured gymnast. I had a bad back. I was looking for an activity that I could do that would maybe rehab my back and give me something to do where I could be physically active. At the hill stride, at the bottom of the hill in LA, was a bunch of tents. And they were shoe companies who were starting a walking category, and they wanted to know what race walkers and walkers wanted in a shoe. And I was intrigued by that. So there was Rockport, there was Kangaroo. Of course, Nike was the biggest sponsor. Reebok, I believe, was there. Rockport was there. All these brands. And I thought, well, this is a really exciting time to come into the sport. And I started becoming interested in the footwear and wanting to see where that went. And so I started actually by tweaking my shoes, which other race walkers were doing as well. People would drill holes in the foot in the forefoot here to make a shoe bend. They were beveling the heel. And so that's where I started, was just by cobbling up my own shoes to figure out how that might improve my performance.
Excellent. And this is a picture from your archives. You want to explain what's going on here?
So later on in my career. So what happened was I went to shoe companies like other race walkers have and said, "Hey, make a race walk shoe," and we're turned down. So after many years of that, I went to work for Columbia Sportswear and got a job in their development department, and I was their fit and wear test coordinator for a couple of years. So this is a picture of me in China, and I am working with the Asian team to we were standardizing the fit for Columbia Sportswear. So that's where I learned a lot of the footwear construction, the manufacturing process, just basically how shoes are made and why they're done in the way that they're done, and how to really bridge an idea with an actual product. So that was a really pivotal role for me for in my research for this shoe, was working at Columbia Sportswear, and it was a wonderful opportunity. I will always be grateful to them for giving me that opportunity. I
Great.
got a lot of contacts too for factories and last manufacturers, all the little components that you don't think about that are just crucial to making product.
And this led you to researching basically the idea of Reshod walking.
Sure.
And
Yeah, so I had done a lot of that before I went to work for Columbia Sportswear. So what happened was I was, again, a neophyte. I didn't know anything about footwear construction. I had no plans at all of starting a footwear brand, but I was trying to explain to a shoe company, hey, this is what I think would really work. And to do that, I needed to come up with a prototype. So back in the 80s, 90s, most of the talent, the footwear talent, was already working for brands. So it was really difficult to find someone who would be an advocate for me. So what I did was I went to a shoe repair shop, and I had him pull off the upper and carve off the midsole, outsole. And then I started playing around with different components. And I got those components at material shows, which were taking place in the Portland area. Since Portland has so many footwear brands, they have a material show twice a year at the convention center. So I would go there and I would talk to different companies who were selling their products, and I would take samples and I'd go back and then I would cut them up and carve them up, and then I'd take them to a shoe repair who would grind them and put the shoe together, and then I would go out and test it and walk in them, and I'd race in them. So this is a picture of me drawing the lines on the sheet stock foam that I used to glue together. Each pair took 5 hours. So it wasn't something I could do very quickly, but it was invaluable research into which angles to use, which densities to use, which outsoles work better. And then again, when I started the brand, here's a shoe I made for a customer. So this is what happened is now the athletes I coach wanted a pair. So that's why I started Reshod Walking Shoes. I wanted to have a legitimate business. And so people would send me their shoes and I'd do the same thing. I'd have by then I left the shoe repairs and I had a designated person, an engineer who'd worked for a footwear brand. And so he did the work on these so that I had consistent product. And then, yeah, I would make these. And then I started a website because you got to have a website, right? So then I started getting international customers. People would send me their shoes too internationally. And so that's where Reshod launched, is in 2008. I'd left Columbia Sportswear and was working on the next step.
And you know, I've been a very proud promoter and very complimentary of the Coach Carmen's and the custom shoes that we're about to talk about. But you know, I was not a big fan of the resold shoes, right? I tried them, and I just want to set the record that I'm not just sitting here saying, "Ooh, everything that somebody does is great," because I tend to only do talks on the positive. But I want to just, you know, put some history into things.
Yeah.
It took the evolution of what you're doing for me to jump on board.
Yeah.
And where you're at now, I really,
Yeah.
really like for, you know, most race walkers, most power walkers. Obviously, some people may have unique needs that,
Yeah.
you know, we can't talk about in generalities because
Right.
she's very, very custom, right?
Yeah.
But let's talk about that evolution. So
Yeah.
obviously, you can't run a business that takes 5 hours a shoe,
Right.
regardless of how good and how much
Right.
people like it, right?
Right.
So you
Right.
took a very bold step uh, and changed your house forever, right?
I did. I missed a lot of training too, by the way. Lost a lot of hours I could have been on the road.
Those who contribute
Yeah, yeah,
in a non-competitive way
yeah,
do it at the
yeah.
sacrifice of their competition. So,
Well, and I'll tell you, my original goal was to make an Olympic team, just like so many others. I want to make a national team, but I knew we needed product. And as a gymnast, I knew that intrinsically because in gymnastics, it's all about the equipment. And what I saw in gymnastics, as it was a very small sport, it's hard to imagine, but it was not popular back in the 70s, at least in the United States. And it grew because the equipment changed. And so I knew when I came into our sport, if we don't change the equipment, if we don't get something unique for us, then people aren't going to, they're not going to get excited about it. So,
what you're saying is the only reason I wasn't an Olympic gymnast is because I didn't have the right equipment.
there you go.
We'll leave that right there. All right.
We'll leave that to interpretation. But
So-
no, the balance beams were wood. Now they're padded, they're wrapped. The bars were oval. Instead, the women's were oval instead of round. Now they moved from wood to fiberglass. They added spring to the floors. All of those things allowed gymnasts to do more skills, do harder skills. And so we're seeing that right now with the super shoes, with the springs in them. But for me, I came up with a very simple technology back in the 90s. I got my first patent in 1993, I believe it was, for this pushover technology, which is what I used in the Coach Carmen. But yeah, it just kept evolving. But see, here's the problem, Jeff, is I didn't have access to all the materials and all the things that you have in big brands. So I was really limited. So you were saying you weren't on board with that first shoe. I think I still have it somewhere here. I know I do. I have your shoes. But the problem was I had to say, here's what I'm thinking. And imagine this. Imagine if it had this outsole or this thing, it would be so much better. And people aren't good at imagining. They're not good at reading my mind and thinking, okay, this is where we're going. And that was the problem I kept running into. I kept thinking, if I could get this right, a shoe company is going to want this because it's a really good idea. But selling it to them involved having it all dialed. And so in this process, which I thought was going to be a really quick year or two process, so I could get back to training for my Olympic goals. In that process is when I actually refined this to a point where it's actually better than what I had originally thought of. And I have now 6 patents on the second shoe. I just got EU patent was just allowed, so it should be issuing very, very soon. Same with Canada. But the pushover, the red shoe, the original red shoe, I have patents now in US, Canada, China, Hong Kong, Japan, and EU. The other
why
shoe.
don't you show us the original Coach Carmen? Tell us what was significant about that, and then why you came out with the red pushover shoe as
Okay. So the first Coach Carmen has angles that are steep. And this shoe has basically 3 parts to them. And this is very firm. And the reason it's firm is because when you get the heel plant, you don't want to pitch and roll. A lot of the running shoes these days have very soft foam, and your energy doesn't direct forward because it's your body is trying to stabilize that heel plant in the soft foam. So this is very firm. And then this one here is a little softer. It's about the same as you'd find in a running flat. And then this here is the rebounding foam that's soft and cushiony. So the premise of this is when you hit your heel, this will start to compress here vertically. So your flexibility isn't here, it's vertical. So as your body shifts and this depresses, it's going to pop your heel up and it puts you in a much better position to drive from. So when you're here, it's less pressure on the knees because you're not trying to maneuver over this. So you're already here. So your weight's no longer on top of over your knee, but you're onto your toes, which is where we get our propulsion from. Now, I will point out too that the earlier shoes had a negative heel. And the negative heel, a lot of people liked, but there were people who didn't. And I was thinking when I went to production in the factories that I needed to make the shoe 0 drop because it was a little more suitable to the general population. So that it was a big change that I made from the customized shoes and the final product. So this shoe is the Coach Carmen.
All right, before we move on, I would just say that it was the negative drop that I didn't like in the original shoes.
Okay.
But
All right.
Kim had a deal, I can't remember the company, where they had a negative drop shoe, and we both liked it for recovery
Okay.
more than actual race walking. But the other thing I would point out with Coach Carmen's, and I think all of your shoes, is that sturdier heel gives you more longevity in the shoe. At least that's what I found. I'm a very hard heel striker, and my record was I blew out one pair in a workout. First workout, I blew them out. Not yours, right? Just running shoes.
Yeah.
And I haven't worn out a pair of yours yet, so
Oh, nice.
but,
I like it.
you know, they clearly last much longer. All right, let's take a look at.
So this is what we had first. People would send me their shoes, and this is when I customized. So they would send me whatever, and then I didn't have to deal with the fit. I knew if someone sent me a shoe, it fit them. So that was a big piece I didn't have to deal with. But then we would carve off that midsole, outsole. So it would go from here to here. And then I would attach, I would cut, this is the parts that took me hours to cut. And then we would attach it and I would send that off. So you'd think that this would be the first shoe that I'd make and send to production. But the problem was that this shoe was very complicated to make. It was a lot less complicated to make the pushover. So that's the one I started with. And the second reason is because that had a bigger demographic. So that one was the shoe that you wear if you're going to Disneyland, you're on your feet all day. I have a customer who works at the Wild Animal Park in San Diego, and she's on her feet walking all day. Loves pushover shoes. So that shoe is, we can't call them red shoes anymore because they come in all sorts of black stuff. So, but the pushover actually has 3 densities. Know how well you can see that. It has 3 densities of foam that are longer levers. So while the Coach Carmen has shorter levers that are steeper pitch, the pushover has the longer. So here's the shorter with a steeper pitch. So we know that short levers are for speed and the longer levers are for power. So the pushover, it feels a little stiffer at first, but these longer levers will take you from heel to toe and really teach you how to roll all the way off your toe and lengthen your stride. So if you have a tight hip flexor, this will really help that out. But again, I just love them for all day. And if I do a distance race, like a 50K, I'm always in the pushovers. So that's what, so the 2 shoes have different uses. And what you were saying about recovery shoe, you could wear one for recovery, one for speed. So they complement each other.
So there are 3 basic types of walkers if we're broadly categorizing. There's the race walker, the power walker, and then I'll call it pedestrianism of just people walking around. So if you had to recommend a Reshod shoe to each of those categories, what would you recommend? It's
funny because people ask me that all the time, and the blue Coach Carmen's were designed for fast, for racing, and the other one was for like the training, just the all-day walking. But people will wear whichever one they like best. So I get people who aren't race walkers that love the Coach Carmen. They love how they feel and how they roll with their body. So I'm still learning from my customers. Wasn't necessarily my thought process is not necessarily how it's playing out. So they wear them all, and travel, people who are traveling, like I said, people who are on their feet all day pushing a gurney or working in a restaurant, they might like the Coach Carmen's. And depending on their foot maladies too, one might work better than the other. So again, I'm still having a learning curve on which styles work best for which. But from the design standpoint, the Coach Carmen was the race shoe. The pushover is not. But I'm making the pushover lighter now, so a lot of people are racing in the pushover 3 and really liking them. So
great. Yeah, as we started, we said shoe selection is a very personal decision. So, and you did mention to me before we got on recording and being live that you are at least in the early stages of creating a racing or a lighter shoe. So we have a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, I need some funding, some help with that. It's definitely tough to run a footwear brand by yourself. So I'm working on changing that, looking for some help and making some progress in that. So I'm pretty excited to do that.
Well, good.
Hi.
Well, I hope that we have another anniversary talk and we'll have new shoes to look at, and excited to see what you come up with. So thanks for your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Enjoy your day.